added to the flavor of the ecumenical group today. I am Mennonite. Have been Mennonite all of my life. And also, you seem like a friendly group, so I need to tell you that I'm not really a public speaker. Very much of an introvert. What I do best is sit and listen to older adults, which I have enjoyed doing for many, many years. So I'd like to share some of their wisdom with you today. Because I'm not a public speaker, I'm tied to my notes here a bit, and I apologize for that. Okay. When I think about being in the company of elders, the words that come to mind to me are holy mystery and surprises and blessings. The elders have been my teachers. They are the wise ones. And so today I would like to begin by sharing glimpses into the lives of some of my teachers by telling you some stories. These stories really are not mine to share, and for that reason, all of these people have died, but for that reason I've checked with all of their family members to make sure that they feel okay about my sharing these stories. So as I share these stories, I invite you to watch out for the holy mystery and the surprises and the blessings. Sam lamented week after week about his adult children. They don't come to see me. They aren't there for me when I need them. And then one day, filled with remorse, Sam cried, "I was never there for my kids. I want to ask them to forgive me." And he did. He called each one of his children, all who lived at a distance, and he asked for their forgiveness. All of Sam's children forgave him, and they all began to call or to visit him more and more during what would turn out to be the last years of his life. Phyllis had a debilitating neurological disorder. She was totally dependent upon others for all of her care and had given up almost all of her possessions. She was living in a nursing home. She still had a beautiful soprano voice and was still able to sing. When asked how she had coped with all that she had given up, she exclaimed, "I have so many blessings on my list, I don't even know what to do with all of them." Ruth lived with dementia for many years. She was mostly nonverbal and kept her eyes closed. When offered the words of a communion blessing, "Christ's body broken for you," and a gentle touch to her arm, Ruth's eyes opened, lit up, and she exclaimed with a smile, "Oh, that is so good." Edna, dying of terminal cancer, asked each of her children to release her so she could die. After all of her children released her, Edna told one of her daughters, "I don't know who it is, but there is someone who hasn't released me yet. We need to pray for them." What Edna hadn't been told was that her sister was traveling from out of state, hoping desperately to see her one last time. How did Edna have this sense? Almost 100-year-old Ethel said, "I would like to die peacefully in my bed." And I tell the Lord that. And then I say, "But Lord, if you would be glorified more by my suffering, I am ready to suffer for you." And then there are the healthcare staff at nursing homes weeping following the deaths of men and women who are so incapacitated, our society would say they no longer had purpose. Does God use those who need care to nurture empathy and compassion in those providing care? Does God grant us a spiritual vocation until our last breath? So today I would like to talk a bit in general about spirituality and aging, and then to begin to set a foundation for ministry. my PowerPoint is long, and I'm not going to be able to get through all of it this morning, so I think I'll need to say the last one, some ways spiritual growth can be encouraged and supported, to talk about this afternoon, if you're interested in that. I am drawn to these scriptures as I think about my experiences with older adults. As in Psalm 92, in old age, people do still produce fruit. They're always green and full of sap. I have had many conversations with people talking to them about you are green and full of sap. People like to hear that they're full of sap. And in 2 Corinthians, I've experienced so much relating to people as their bodies are deteriorating, that their spiritual wisdom continues and is renewed day by day. I have heard new spiritual insights coming from people who are in their late 90s, and it is so exciting. And in John 21, this scripture, Jesus is talking to Peter about how his death will glorify God. So this scripture is not about people in nursing homes, and yet it reminds me of that. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not want to go. And I've experienced the glory of God through many people who are in the situation where they have a gate belt around them and often are taken where they do not want to go. So I think our views of aging can certainly impact our approach to ministry. And our society gives us many subtle and not so subtle views about aging, and many of them are negative. You think about, there's lots of ageist birthday cards out there, and jokes, lots of ageist jokes as well, and many negative stereotypes. Can you think of some negative stereotypes about aging? Yes.
Over the hill.
When you get a certain age, you're over the hill.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks. Older people are all depressed and lonely.
Growing old ain't for sissies.
Growing old ain't for sissies. And that is, we'll talk about that. For sissies. But gratefully, God gives us what we need. There are some positive stereotypes too. Have you heard that all old people are sweet? That's not necessarily true.
We're not getting older, we're just getting better.
When I was in graduate school, that was a popular book, Aging is Not for Sissies. Many of you may be familiar with M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, and he starts out that book by saying life is difficult. And if you want a dim view of aging, read Ecclesiastes 12, especially in the paraphrase of the Message. So we can't deny that changes do come with aging. And some we can laugh about, but others are devastating. To be told that we have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease is devastating for the person and for the family. And even when we're the most vulnerable, difficult things continue to happen. At 98, being told that your grandson was killed in a truck accident. So it's a fact that difficult things come to us. And the longer we live, the more apt we are to have to face them. Well, it's common for our culture to say if we age successfully, we're going to be able to keep doing the same things that we did in midlife. But if you think about that, we're all going to fail then at aging. But the good news is that current research is now starting to look at some gains that can come with aging. And what they're finding is that aging well is not necessarily maintaining physical abilities, but aging well is continuing to develop the spiritual aspects of our lives. And this brings positives in lives. It helps us to see the positive no matter what has happened. It helps us to adjust to the challenges. It helps us to be joyful and happy, again, no matter what happens. So if there are spiritual gains that come with age, then I wonder, could the way we view aging and the challenges that come get in the way of seeing the blessings God offers us in our later years? And does God offer us something deeper in our later years? Does this transform the experience of our bodies deteriorating? And does this transform the way we see ministry with older adults? Do important ministry questions become, what do elders have to teach us? How can we glean their wisdom? And how can we appreciate their journey? So I'm going to be speaking in generalities today, but it's important to remember that as we age, we become unique or more unique.
Yeah.
When you've seen one older person, you've seen one older person. So everyone has their own unique and very spiritual journey.
That's a t-shirt.
So what am I talking about today? Spirituality. I'm not talking about a doctrine or a set of beliefs. I'm not a theologian. I'm talking about something that really is the deepest dimension of our life. It's a realization that there is something greater than ourselves, and it becomes the ultimate basis of our questions and our hopes and our fear and our love. It's often thought of in terms of relationship to the divine, to others, to ourselves. But an important thing to note is it's not always apparent. It includes mystery. So if we don't watch for it, we're likely to miss it. We don't just become spiritual in old age. We have been created as spiritual beings, always longing for a relationship with God, with ourselves, and with others. But a shift seems to take place in the second half of life, and it propels us from an outward journey to an inward journey. In the first half of life, we're busy. We're busy going to school, getting married, having a family, building careers, accumulating material possessions. In the second half of life, we begin to face limitations. We need to slow down. We may begin to experience loss, perhaps the loss of a spouse or another family member, perhaps the loss of a job or a marriage. And we may also find that success and wealth isn't as meaningful as we thought it was. So we start digging deeper. It's likely we have experienced some difficult times by the second half of life. Richard Rohr calls this necessary suffering, and he suggests that we don't really begin to dig deeper until we experience some situation that we can't fix on our own. As we begin to think about some of the spiritual tasks and then some of the blessings that come as we continue to grow spiritually, you may want to look at a handout that I put together. It looks like this. I think we have that.
We may have to share. I don't know that there's. Is it on here? No, it's a different. This one's a few arrows on it.
As I was reflecting on this presentation, I thought about the seeming connection between the spiritual tasks of the second half of life and the blessings that come with continued spiritual growth. And it's no surprise that God provides what we need to address the tasks that we are given. And this chart was my humble attempt to illustrate that in some way. However, I want to make a disclaimer that it's not black and white, like the chart makes it appear, that I can't tame the mystery of God, of God's presence with us, but it might give you some sense of that as we grow spiritually, it helps us accomplish the tasks that are a part of our lives. So in the second half of life, we naturally begin to think about experiences from childhood on. We do kind of a life review. And it may not be intentional. The memories may just start coming to us. And this helps us to integrate all of our life experiences. It helps us to see, how did they all fit together? How did they impact me? And it also helps people sometimes to reframe some of the difficult things that were a part of their life earlier, so that it may not seem like it was so horrible, or they may be able to see some blessings that came from those experiences. This one is a huge one. To be able to move from doing to being and develop a changing sense of self-worth. To transcend disabilities and loss of control. So many people wonder, what value am I when I'm no longer working? What value am I when I can't do what I used to be able to do? And how can I find self-worth when I have become so dependent? Questions of meaning and purpose become front and center as people begin to lose physical abilities, have less energy, and can't do what they used to be able to do. How many of you, when you got up today, said, I hope I can suffer today? We don't want to suffer. We want to be in control. We want to fix things or have God fix things. And yet life happens, and experiences in life bring suffering. So when suffering comes to us or to our family members or friends, we try to make sense of it. Several months before my mother-in-law died, she offered me the best sermon I have ever heard and ever will hear. It was so profound. And what she said was, Dianne, in the end, it comes down to love. Ira Byock, who is a hospice physician, agrees with my mother-in-law. He wrote a book called The Four Things That Matter. And he said, or writes, if you ask a man being wheeled into transplant surgery or a woman facing chemo for a third time, what's on their mind, the answer will always involve the people they love. Always. Another task is to let go of possessions and of our false self. So we question, who am I when I no longer have my health and am no longer surrounded by my possessions? When I no longer have the roles in life, I may not be a spouse anymore because my spouse has died. I don't have my job anymore. Who are we when all we have to give is ourself? So really, who has God created each of us to be? To forgive and to give forgiveness. This can be the toughest of things to do. Nona was in her late 70s. She met with someone every week for over a year to talk about her mother. She was desperately trying to let go of the horrible things that her mother had done so that Nona could forgive her. As hard as she tried, Nona could not forgive her mother. And then she developed terminal cancer. As she lay dying, Nona was unresponsive and was very restless. For one short moment, she rallied and told her children that she had seen her mother smiling at her. Nona immediately became unresponsive again. The difference was that she now lay peacefully until her death. Was Nona finally able to forgive her mother? Holy mystery. We need to find hope in the midst of challenges. Hope you offered us this morning. We need to be able to lament and grieve the losses that we've experienced. People often try to move people out of their grief too quickly. And that becomes a real challenge for people. We need to learn to be comfortable sitting with people who are grieving and lamenting without trying to move them forward. We need to be careful to not minimize what the person is feeling, because that can prevent them from seeing for themselves what they need to do to move forward. We need to be able to give to others, no matter what our abilities are. This has become a soapbox issue for me. People do continue to give to others, but we need to have eyes to see it. I so believe that God gives us a spiritual vocation until our last breath, no matter how disabled we become. If an unresponsive, bed-bound person is no longer grief-giving, why do staff in nursing homes cry when they die? If a person is no longer giving, why do nursing home staff say that being in the presence of a resident cheers them up when they are having a bad day? Why else would a resident experiencing dementia wheel her wheelchair toward another resident in need in an effort to help when she herself needs great assistance? And why did my co-chaplain and I experience the love of Jesus most consistently and intensely when we were worshiping with people who were severely impaired with dementia, if they weren't in some way sharing Jesus' love with us? It makes no logical sense. It's holy mystery, surprising, and filled with blessings. We need to experience God's presence and unconditional love and to prepare for death. Research tells us that the fear of death decreases with age. My wise friend Effie told me some years ago when she was 96 years old, people ask me, why are you moving to an assisted living facility? That's where people go when they're ready to die. And I say, what's wrong with that? We are getting ready to die. Whether I would be home or here, it doesn't really matter to me where I am when I die. I'm not worried about dying, she said. I feel ready. But I'm not just thinking about it all the time either. I have lots to live for. I want to see my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren grow up. My dear friend Irene was very close to dying. She was still able to converse. And I went to see her, and I asked her what was on her heart. And she told me what was on her heart. And then she said, I hope I have several more days before I die. She died 4 days later. I still get teary when I think about that. I've often wondered what she had to do in those 4 days, what she and the Lord had to do in those 4 days. But the Lord granted her her wish. It's wonderful. So it does seem that God gives us the gifts that we need to complete the spiritual tasks of life. One of the things that researchers have discovered is that as we age, we develop a new perception of time, so that it can seem like we're in yesterday and today all at once. One person says, you go back to childhood almost daily. It comes without reflection. I talked to a good friend about this. We go back to the town where we grew up in our thoughts. Childhood means much more than one thinks. I go back all of the time. So if we think back to one of the spiritual tasks to integrate all of our life experiences, being able to have a new perception of time seems to be a gift that helps us accomplish that task. But also, if you think about some of the negative stereotypes of aging, we heard that we move to our second childhood when we age. So the stereotype puts a negative spin on really what is a healthy developmental task of aging. You also feel a greater sense of belonging with past and future generations. So we begin to see how we will continue to be a part of life in the future through our grandchildren, our children and our grandchildren. And we're not so focused on our own life. We can see beyond the earthly view. A gentleman said, I particularly remember one night, I looked out and saw the moon. Suddenly I got the thought that it was the same moon and the same sun that the ancestors I never knew saw. It was a strange feeling that I can't explain, a feeling of kinship to all who have gone before, all who share the earth with us now, and all who will come after we are no longer here. It becomes easier for us to accept the mysteries of life. One person said, when I was younger, I had all the answers. But now I realize maybe I didn't know as much as I thought I did. People also become more comfortable with the questions of life and don't feel like they have to have an answer to everything. My friend Effie told me, I have had some really special experiences. I have heard God speaking directly to me. I have seen heaven. Heaven is so beautiful, so bright and glowing. I can't really explain it, but I remember thinking, why would I want to be on earth when I could be in heaven? One night I heard a choir quietly singing over and over, "Oh, how I love Jesus." It went on for a long time. I didn't have a radio or record on. Effie said, I wonder, what does this mean? What was God trying to tell me? I have to think about this some more. Sometimes I wish I could have many more special experiences like this. Our sources of joy tend to change as we grow older. We find greater pleasure in the small and ordinary aspects of life. We find that experiences with nature can bring about feelings of being one with all of life, experiencing God in all created things. So in our younger years, going on this huge vacation may have been the source of our joy. But now, in older years, people find joy in looking at cloud formations, seeing a flower garden, listening to music, or spending time in silence. We discover new sides of ourselves, both positive and negative. And research suggests that it may be at this stage of life that we're more willing to look at some of the negative parts of our life. We have a new capacity to be oneself, to take off the mask of who we thought we should be. We move from doing to being. We may learn that about new gifts. And there's some research that shows that creativity increases as we age. People may start writing poetry or drawing for the first time in their older years. We have an increasing sense of wonder and gratitude. I met recently with a lady who has started a gratitude journal, and her goal is to list 1,000 things that she is grateful for. She had started it before I met with her because she was at number 974 when we met. So in later years, people who have never been affectionate may now love to hug their children, or they may tell them for the first time that they love them. Or grandparents may warmly welcome a granddaughter and her female partner into their home and life when they would have struggled with that before. There's a desire to develop deeper relationships with family and friends. So as energy decreases, people aren't as interested in being with so many people anymore, but are more interested in developing deeper relationships with those who mean a lot to them. My friend Effie, again, Effie was such a wise woman. I went to visit her one day and she was so excited. She said, "Dianne, I sent a letter to my daughters." All of her daughters lived at a distance. And she said, "I wanted them to know these things before I die." And she opened up to her daughters and told them very meaningful things to her about how she felt about them and also about life experiences. And when I went back a couple of weeks later, she was so excited again because all of her daughters had sent her letters opening up more to her, and their relationship became more meaningful. We want fewer possessions. Too many possessions can become a burden. And I've seen this over and over with people who have downsized, who've moved to retirement facilities, maybe in an independent apartment, and then moved to an assisted living where they've had to downsize some more, and then perhaps to a nursing home with maybe one room or half of a room. And it's amazing, people's ability to do that. It's not easy. It's not easy. My mother is an extreme example of that. She was living in an assisted living facility and she fell and broke her hip. And when she went to the hospital to have her hip repaired, they discovered that she had colon and liver cancer. And she had to have a colostomy. So was never able to see her possessions again. And yet it was amazing because the relationships that she had with her friends and her family became much more important than seeing her possessions again. So material possessions become less important and relationships become more important. So we have an increased ability to accept what is, and that we have a peace and a joy even though we've experienced tragedy. And we can sort out what's important from what's not so important. We have an increased ability to live in the moment. There's less anxiety about disease and ill health, and again, the less fear of death. John Leland is an author who just wrote a book, Happiness is a Choice You Make. And he followed a number of older adults for a year, and he also interviewed gerontologists who had been working with older adults for many years. And he writes in his book, if you want to be happy, think like an old person. That older people were happy in spite of, they were happy in spite of the difficult things that came in their lives. Whereas younger people tended to see happiness in terms of if I'll be happy if only I get this job, or I'll be happy if only I have this spouse or marry this person. Now again, I just want to say, no, those can be seen as stereotypes too. It's not that it's that way for absolutely every older person or every younger person, but that's what the research has been finding. And we prefer more solitude. So it's important as we plan activities or things for older adults to sort of sort out. It may be that someone wants solitude and doesn't want to join in something because they want solitude at that particular time rather than not being social. We also don't worry so much about the dogma of faith, but focus more on a personal relationship with God. And I found it interesting in the John Leland book that he quotes some research that suggests that the brains of older persons resembled brains of persons who were regular meditators.
Here we go.
Yay! Finally paying them.
How are we doing on time? I think.
About maybe 8 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. So how can we support elders on their journey? Ask, ask, ask. Just as you suggested, ask younger people, ask older people. I have found that people most often have the wisdom within themselves about what it is they want and need. So it's a matter of building trusting relationships and asking the questions to make it safe for people to tell you what they want or what they need. In 2013, my congregation developed a survey for people who were 70 and above, and we got a 72% response rate. People were very interested in letting us know what they needed and what they wanted. And then we had a luncheon meeting later to share the results, and again, that was very well attended. And we learned some really helpful things that I can share more of that this afternoon. This is so key, to recognize and share your gratitude for the gifts and the blessings the elders in your life offer you, and be specific about what you appreciate. It seems to me that elders can so easily compare themselves to what they used to be able to do, and then they get stuck in what they can't do. It's important to acknowledge people's feelings about losing abilities and to help people lament their losses, but also so important to share with them the blessings that you receive from them. For example, how their smile or greeting makes you feel welcome when you visit, or how their stories offer you hope of being able to cope with your own life and the struggles if and when they come, or how their faith journey has been an inspiration to you. Listening to stories is so very, very important. Listening may help someone understand what needs to be made whole before death. It may help someone grieve losses. It may help someone finally feel like they're a beloved child of God. And some stories need to be repeated over and over and over. If you think about Sam that I shared earlier, how Sam came and lamented week after week, my kids aren't there for me. Sam needed to hear that story of his over and over until finally he was able to have an aha moment and say, it wasn't the kids, it was me. And then Sam was able to move from being a victim to being a reconciler, which gave him what he really wanted in the first place. And some stories need to be repeated over and over because the person has dementia. And for many reasons, we need to compassionately listen over and over to the stories of people who have dementia.
We might even hear something different.
We may hear something different, yes. And we often hear faith stories in the stories that we listen to. I mentioned this earlier, but we need opportunities to lament and to grieve. And I've found that persons of faith sometimes think they shouldn't lament because that would mean that they don't trust God or they don't trust God's plan for them. So I've also found that praying with the Psalms that talk about being in distress, calling out in distress, sometimes gives people permission to lament. People sometimes need to be able to lament before they can move on. And sometimes people stay in the lamenting stage. God is with them too, there, and hopefully some other people can walk along beside them as well. Offer opportunities for intergenerational groups. In the survey that our church did, what we found out was that people who were 70 and above felt like they were segregated by age, and they didn't like that. They wanted to have opportunities to interact with younger people. And intergenerational groups benefits people of all ages. I don't know if any of you would have heard on Talk of Iowa on IPR, this has been a couple of weeks ago, but there was a recent college graduate who, for an internship, moved into an assisted living facility for a month, I believe. And she was so excited about that experience. She called it a very powerful experience. She said that it helped her slow down and reflect on the things that she wants to value. She said she learned that everyone is unique and different. She said they have so much life, so much to share. And she said, I'm just starting out, but they have been through things I need to face. Their stories help me think how I can cope if I need to face some of these things. And one thing that I thought was great was she's going to go to med school, but she's decided not to go for a year, and she's taken a job in a retirement facility for a year. And she said, I was sort of interested in pediatrics, but I'm thinking maybe geriatrics. I said, yes, I'll need you sometime. We need to offer service opportunities for people, no matter what their abilities are. There's a woman by the name of Jane Theobald who is a gerontologist, and she worked with the University of Kentucky, and she was very interested in working with people who had intense suffering. And she said, people who are suffering physically and emotionally need that addressed through medicine and other opportunities. But she said, for those who still have some residual suffering, she wanted to offer what she called dedicated suffering groups. And so she worked with nursing homes, I believe, and she gathered together between 2 and 12 people who were very disabled by their suffering and focused on their suffering all the time. And so when the group met, each person went around and said in 1 or 2 sentences what their suffering was that day. No one responded to it. They just said what their suffering was. And then after everyone was done talking, then together the group decided that they wanted to turn this suffering into positive energy and to give it to God and to have God send that positive energy to someone else in need. And so the group decided who that was going to be, whether it was an individual or whether it was a group that was suffering. So then, once they made that decision, then the group prayed together, and then they visualized for a minute that suffering, God taking that suffering, turning it into positive energy, and sharing it with someone in need. And what she found in doing this was that the people felt an increased connection to the community. They became less self-absorbed, and it gave them purpose. They felt less like a burden on others. So people who depend on others for care are often deprived of the opportunity to give to others. And we need to find ways for them to be able to do that, because having the opportunity to give in some way is transformative. Is my time up?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But I have time. I'd like to read a prayer yet. Okay. This is a prayer for aging written by Sister Moya Hanlon. All gracious God, you have given me all I am and have, and now I give it back to you to stand under your will alone. In a special way, I give you these later years of my life. I am one of those called by you into old age, a call not given to all, not given to Jesus, not given to most in our world today. I humbly ask you, grace me deeply in each aspect of that struggle. As my physical eyesight weakens, may the eyes of my faith strengthen, that I may see you and your love in everything. As my hearing fails, may the ears of my heart be more attentive to the whisper of your gentle voice. As my legs weaken and walking becomes more difficult, may I walk more truly in your paths, knowing all the while that I am held in the embrace of your love. As my mind becomes less alert and memory fades, may I remain peaceful in you, aware that with you there is no need for thought or word. You ask simply that I be there with you. And should sickness overtake me, and I be confined to bed, may I know myself as one with your Son as he offers his life for the salvation of the world. Finally, as my heart slows a little after the work of the years, may it expand in love for you and all people. May it rest secure and grateful in your loving heart until I am lost in you completely and forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.